Some movies just get better the longer they're around. John Carpenter's The Thing is a perfect example. It tanked when it first came out. Critics hated it, and now it's one of the best horror movies ever. But it goes the other way, too. There's a whole group of films, especially in the 80s, that managed to fool everyone. They were big hits, got all the great reviews, sometimes even won Oscars, but just haven't held up. This is the movie where Meryl Streep is playing Karen Blixen. She leaves Denmark, heads off to Nairobi, tries her hand at running a coffee farm. Robert Redford shows up as this laid-back big game hunter, which honestly just means a lot of scenes with the two of them staring at each other against some pretty incredible backdrops. It's based on Blixen's memoir, but if you're expecting a tight story, it's really just sort of wandering from one moment to the next. The film's famous for the way it looks. Every shot is basically a screensaver, but once you get past the scenery, there's not a whole lot to grab onto. The romance is supposed to be the heart of it, but it always feels kind of off to the side, never really lands. Back in 1985, this thing cleaned up at the Oscars. Critics were all about it. But go look at Rotten Tomatoes now and you'll see it barely holds on to a fresh score. This is one of those Best Picture winners that gets talked about because it won awards, not because anyone's lining up to rewatch it. This was a huge deal in 1983. Critics were calling it the movie for baby boomers, like it finally put that whole generation's anxieties on screen. It's about a bunch of old college friends who get back together after one of them dies. They all meet up for a weekend, spend the whole time reminiscing and talking about how their lives didn't exactly turn out the way they thought. It was supposed to capture that sense of getting older, realizing you're not the rebel you used to be. At the time, it hit hard, especially for the audience that saw themselves in it. Critics loved it. But watching it now, it's tough to connect with. It's almost entirely people talking around a dinner table or lounging in the living room. The big issues feel a lot smaller now. It's less a universal statement about life, more like a time capsule of a certain kind of privilege and nostalgia. The soundtrack is still great, tons of Motown classics, but beyond that, most of what felt deep back then just feels dated now. For Your Eyes Only is the one people point to when they want to say Roger Moore could play Bond serious. But if you actually watch it, you'll notice that serious is a relative term here. This is the movie where Bond gets in a ski chase with a motorcycle on a bobsled track. The plot is supposed to be about a stolen missile system, but honestly, it's so by the numbers you'd be forgiven for forgetting any of it 5 minutes later. The villains are forgettable. There's nothing here like Goldfinger. The sidekicks, the gadgets, even the Bond girls, none of it sticks. You get Margaret Thatcher talking to a parrot at the end, which tells you pretty much everything you need to know about the tone they're aiming for. When it came out in 1981, critics tried to sell it as a return to form after the ridiculousness of Moonraker. Bond fans sometimes call it underrated, but honestly, it's more like underwhelming. It got positive reviews and has a 69 on Rotten Tomatoes, but today most people barely remember it. Here's the thing about Revenge of the Nerds. When it came out, it was sold as the ultimate underdog story. The nerds rise up, fight the jocks, and finally get their due. But if you go back and watch it now, it's one of the most uncomfortable movies in this whole list. There's a mean streak running through the whole thing, and the jokes are mostly just punching down. Homophobic gags, racist jokes, and a whole subplot where the nerds literally set up hidden cameras in a sorority house. And the big romantic moment? The main nerd disguises himself as a popular girl's boyfriend and sleeps with her under false pretenses, and she just falls in love with him. At the time, critics were on board, and it's still got a 70 on Rotten Tomatoes. But if you ask anybody under 40 about it now, most have never seen it. Or if they have, they're usually surprised by how mean-spirited it really is. Tron is one of those movies everyone calls ahead of its time, and that's not wrong, at least when it comes to the visuals. This was 1982, and no one had ever seen anything like this. Computer-generated landscapes, glowing suits, that whole video game vibe. Critics were so distracted by the effects that most of them just gave the rest of the movie a pass. But let's be honest, as a story, Tron is pretty thin. The plot boils down to a computer programmer, Jeff Bridges, getting sucked into a digital world, fighting some evil programs, and that's about it. The characters are mostly there to move the plot along, not to make you care. The franchise keeps coming back. We got another Tron coming this fall, but at its core, Tron is a movie people want to like more than they actually do. Back in 1982, everyone was dazzled. Now we've seen computer graphics 1,000 times, and Tron's story problems are impossible to ignore. That 74 on Rotten Tomatoes is mostly nostalgia, not actual love. This was Timothy Dalton's second run as Bond, and even today you can feel how different this one was. For most of the movie, Bond isn't even technically a secret agent anymore. He quits MI6, goes rogue, and heads off on a personal vendetta after his old friend Felix gets mutilated by a drug lord. This is as far away as you get from the usual Bond formula. Dalton spends half the movie conning his way into the villain's operation, then tries to take it apart from the inside. You can see what they were going for, something darker, more grounded, almost like a British take on Yojimbo. But the problem is, for all the revenge and double-crossing, there's barely any of that twisted fun you get from the best Bond films or even from Kurosawa's original. The highlight is the big action set piece at the end with the gasoline tankers and all the stunts, but the rest is just a lot of angry people fighting over cocaine in the desert. 16 Candles is one of those movies that's always in the conversation when people talk about 80s teen comedies. John Hughes, Molly Ringwald, the whole thing. But you watch it now and it's kind of wild how much stuff just flies under the radar, especially the Long Dong character. I mean, every single scene he's in, it's just another ridiculous stereotype. They even hit a gong whenever he walks in. It was a hit at the time. Hughes had a run where every teenager felt seen in his movies, but with this one, not every character got the same treatment. Even Molly Ringwald's acknowledged the character was a grotesque stereotype. But that's what these movies are, a time capsule. Huge in the 80s, but you look at it now and some stuff just doesn't land at all. Altered States is one of those movies that has a reputation for being a mind-bending sci-fi classic, but honestly, it's more interesting as a story about what went on behind the scenes. The script is by Paddy Chayefsky, who wrote Network and Hospital, but he and director Ken Russell clashed so hard that Chayefsky ended up taking his name off the film. The movie's about a scientist, played by William Hurt, who uses sensory deprivation tanks and hallucinogenic drugs to try and tap into humanity's past, literally de-evolving in the process. There's no question. The imagery is wild, the special effects are inventive, and the movie has its cult following. But for me, and I think a lot of people who see it for the first time now, it just drags. There's a lot of big ideas thrown around, a lot of trippy visuals, but it never quite comes together into something you actually care about. This one's infamous for being one of the least loved Best Picture winners ever, and for good reason. Driving Miss Daisy is basically a two-person character study. Jessica Tandy as Daisy, a wealthy Southern widow, and Morgan Freeman as her driver, Hoke. The movie tries to say something about race, aging, friendship, big, important topics, but it never really digs into any of them. You're told that 25 years go by, but you wouldn't know it from the way the movie handles time. Characters barely change, and when they do, it's usually because of an awkward makeup job. Dan Aykroyd, in particular, just seems to randomly age from scene to scene. Sometimes he's himself. Sometimes it looks like someone glued a gray wig on him and called it a day. If you look at the other Best Picture nominees, Born on the 4th of July, Dead Poets Society, Field of Dreams, My Left Foot, any of those would have aged better. But somehow, this one fooled the voters, probably because it was safe and it's still a punchline today. Superman 2 is a movie people want to love, mostly because Terrence Stamp is just unforgettable as General Zod. But if you watch the whole thing, it's all over the place. Christopher Reeve and Margot Kidder still have chemistry, but even that feels off this time around. Superman is so busy trying to show Lois Lane his fortress of solitude that he barely notices 3 Kryptonian supervillains are taking over the planet. And then you get into the weirdest stuff. The amnesia kiss, the cellophane S-shield, teleportation, all kinds of new superpowers that just show up out of nowhere. It's like the movie's making it up as it goes along. For what it's worth, there are actually 2 different cuts of Superman 2, and neither one really solves these problems. People remember it fondly, and for a long time critics kept the rating high because it was fun. But really, it's just a mess.